What if the biggest name in K-pop didn't just earn his throne through talent alone, but because an entire company quietly built a kingdom around him? We're talking about Jeon Jungkook, the golden Maknae of BTS, the man whose every breath seems to generate headlines, whose every move shakes the global music industry. But here's the thing that nobody really talks about. What was happening behind those closed doors at Hybe? What were the staff whispering about when the cameras weren't rolling? Recently, former Hybe employees have started opening up, and what they revealed is absolutely jaw-dropping. We're not talking about rumors, we're not talking about fan theories, we're talking about real accounts from real people who worked inside that building, who saw everything firsthand. Why did Jungkook always seem to get opportunities that other artists could only dream of? Was it pure merit, or was there something deeper going on? Did Hybe deliberately craft a system that placed one artist above everyone else? And if so, what does that tell us about the ugly truth behind the K-pop industry's glittering facade? How far would a company go to protect its most valuable asset? Buckle up, because in this list, we're counting down 7 shocking revelations from Hybe's own former staff, and trust me, by the time we hit number 1, everything you thought you knew about Jungkook's career is going to look completely different. Let's get into it. Number 7, the private studio, a room built only for him. Now before you say, well, every big artist gets a studio, hold on, because this is not what you think. According to a former Hybe sound engineer who worked at the company between 2019 and 2022, Jungkook didn't just have access to a recording studio, he had an entire room custom designed, acoustically engineered, and permanently reserved under his name on one of the upper floors of the Hybe building in Yongsan. And when we say permanently reserved, we mean nobody else could book it. Nobody else could even enter it without direct authorization. This wasn't a shared space. This wasn't a first-come, first-served situation like what other artists under the Hybe umbrella had to deal with. This was Jungkook's room, period. The former staff member described the studio as being equipped with top-of-the-line Neumann microphones. We're talking the U87 series, which alone costs around $5,000 to $7,000 per unit, along with custom monitoring speakers, a hand-picked selection of analog outboard gear, and an atmospheric lighting system that Jungkook himself reportedly helped design because he said he could only truly feel the music when the room had a specific mood. Now let's pause here and really think about what that means. In any entertainment company, studio time is one of the most valuable and fought-over resources. Artists literally schedule weeks in advance just to get a few hours in a decent recording room. Trainees? They sometimes have to record demos in makeshift booths or practice rooms because the main studios are always occupied. But Jungkook had a space that was essentially off-limits to everyone else in the building. One former vocal trainer, who asked to remain anonymous, mentioned that there were times when the studio sat empty for days, sometimes even weeks, because Jungkook was overseas for schedules or simply wasn't in the mood to record. And during those stretches of emptiness, other artists who desperately needed studio time were turned away from that room. They were told it was reserved. Not in use, not occupied, just reserved. Imagine being a rookie artist under Hybe labels. Maybe you're in Hybe or you're a trainee preparing for debut, and you're scrambling to find a decent room to lay down your vocals, and right there on the same floor there's a pristine, world-class studio sitting completely vacant, and you can't touch it. That's not just special treatment, that's a psychological message. It tells everyone in that building exactly who the priority is. And look, let's be fair here, Jungkook absolutely earned his status. The man is arguably the most commercially successful solo K-pop artist of his generation. His debut solo album, Golden, went crazy on the charts. 7, featuring Lado, spent weeks dominating the Billboard Hot 100, and Standing Next to You proved that he wasn't just a singer. He was a full-blown global pop star with the dance skills, the visuals, and the vocal power to back it all up. So yes, from a business standpoint, does it make sense for Hybe to invest heavily in their biggest asset? Absolutely. But here's where it gets uncomfortable, because the question isn't whether Jungkook deserved premium resources. The question is whether the system was fair to everyone else. The former sound engineer also revealed something even more interesting. He said that when Jungkook was preparing for his solo debut in 2023, the company brought in external producers and engineers from the United States and the United Kingdom specifically to work in that studio with him. We're talking about Grammy-nominated professionals being flown across the world, put up in hotels in Seoul, and given schedules that revolved entirely around Jungkook's availability. If Jungkook wanted to record at 2 a.m. because that's when he felt most creative, the entire team adjusted. If he wanted to take a break for 3 days in the middle of a session, nobody questioned it. The project moved at his pace, on his terms, in his room. Now compare that to what other Hybe solo artists have described in various interviews, having to work within tight schedules, sharing producers with multiple projects, and sometimes receiving tracks that were pre-selected by the company rather than having the luxury of choosing their own collaborators. The gap in treatment isn't subtle. It's a canyon. And the reason this revelation sits at number 7 isn't because it's minor, it's because it's the foundation. This is the entry point into understanding how Hybe's internal ecosystem was structured around one individual. The private studio isn't just a room with expensive equipment. It's a symbol. It represents a philosophy within the company that said, in no uncertain terms, this artist is different, and he will be treated differently. The former staff member ended his account by saying something that really stuck. He said, every company has its favorite. But at Hybe, it wasn't a secret. It was architecture. You could literally see it in the building layout. And honestly, that one sentence tells you more about Hybe's internal culture than any press release or official statement ever could. The walls themselves were designed to reflect the hierarchy. So the next time you watch a behind-the-scenes video of Jungkook casually recording in what looks like an incredibly aesthetic, moody, cinematic studio, now you know. That room wasn't just handed to him on a whim. It was built for him. Specifically. Intentionally. And exclusively. But wait. If a private studio is just number 7 on this list, what could possibly be more shocking? What if I told you that the special treatment didn't just extend to physical spaces, but to the very people assigned to protect and manage Jungkook's daily life? What if the staffing decisions around him revealed an even deeper level of favoritism that made other artists' teams look like skeleton crews? Stay locked in, because number 6 is going to change how you see the entire management structure behind K-pop's biggest names. Number 6, the Shadow Army, a personal team like no other. Alright, let's get into something that most fans never even think about, the people behind the people. Every K-pop idol has a management team. That's standard. You've got your manager, maybe an assistant manager, a coordinating staff member, and, depending on the group's schedule, a driver and a stylist rotation. For most artists under Hybe labels, that's roughly what you'd expect. A small, efficient team that handles the day-to-day logistics of an idol's life. But according to 2 former Hybe management staff members who spoke independently about their experiences, Jungkook's personal team operated on an entirely different scale. We're not talking about a slightly bigger crew. We're talking about what one of them literally called a shadow army. At the height of BTS's global dominance, around 2021 to 2022, Jungkook reportedly had a dedicated personal team of approximately 15 to 18 people assigned specifically to him. Not to BTS. Not to the group collectively. To him individually. Let that sink in for a second. 15 to 18 staff members whose entire professional existence revolved around one 20-something-year-old from Busan. Now, let's break down what that team actually looked like, because the structure itself is honestly fascinating. According to the former staff, Jungkook's personal team included 2 full-time personal managers who worked in rotating shifts to ensure 24-hour coverage, yes, around the clock. Because the company determined that Jungkook's status as the most searched K-pop idol on the planet meant that any incident, any unauthorized photo, any unexpected public appearance could spiral into a global news event within minutes. So there was always someone on call, always someone ready to respond. On top of that, he had a dedicated security detail of 3 to 4 bodyguards, not the shared security that Hybe provides for group schedules, but personal bodyguards who accompanied him even on his days off. These weren't your average security guards either. One former staff member mentioned that at least two of them had backgrounds in South Korean special forces, and they were specifically recruited because of their ability to handle high-pressure crowd situations without creating scenes. If you've ever watched fan cams of Jungkook at airports and noticed how seamlessly his security moves, creating space without pushing, redirecting crowds without aggression, now you understand why. These were trained professionals operating at a level that most K-pop security teams simply don't reach. Then there was the styling department. While most Hybe artists share stylists from a rotating pool, meaning the same stylist might dress an Hybe member in the morning and a TXT member in the afternoon, Jungkook had two personal stylists and a dedicated wardrobe coordinator who maintained an inventory of his clothing, tracked which outfits he'd worn publicly to avoid repeats in high-profile settings, and even coordinated with luxury brands like Calvin Klein, Dior, and later Valentino to ensure that his off-duty fashion aligned with ongoing brand partnerships. This is the level of detail we're talking about. His wardrobe wasn't just managed, it was curated, cataloged, and strategized. One of the former stylists reportedly kept a digital archive of every outfit Jungkook wore to every schedule, tagged by date, occasion, brand, and color palette, so that months later they could cross-reference and make sure nothing clashed with his evolving public image. That's not styling. That's brand architecture applied to a human being's closet. But it doesn't stop there. Jungkook's team also included a dedicated content coordinator, someone whose sole job was to manage the logistics of his personal content output. We're talking about his solo V-Lives, his Instagram posts before and after BTS's transition to individual accounts, his Weverse interactions, and later his solo promotional content for Seven and Golden. This person didn't create the content. Jungkook is famously hands-on with his own creative output, but they manage the scheduling, the platform optimization, the translation coordination, and the strategic timing of posts to maximize engagement across different time zones. When Jungkook posted something at what seemed like a random hour, it often wasn't random at all. There was someone behind the scenes who had calculated the optimal window for maximum visibility in North America, Europe, and Asia simultaneously. And here's where the comparison gets truly uncomfortable. Former staff members revealed that some of the other solo artists under Hybe labels, including artists who were generating significant revenue and had substantial fan bases of their own, operated with teams of 5 to 7 people total. Some newer acts had even fewer. One former manager for a different Hybe group described feeling stretched impossibly thin, managing 3 members simultaneously while also handling logistics coordination that at other companies would have been a separate department's responsibility. He said there were days when he was running on 3 hours of sleep because the workload was simply too much for the size of the team. And meanwhile, he knew that down the hall, Jungkook's team had people whose entire job was to make sure his daily coffee order was placed at the right cafe at the right time so it would be ready and at the perfect temperature when he arrived at the building. Now, is that an exaggeration? Maybe slightly. But the point the former staff member was making is that the resource allocation wasn't just uneven, it was staggeringly disproportionate. And this created a real psychological impact within the company. Multiple former employees described a culture where everyone understood, explicitly or implicitly, that Jungkook's needs came first. If there was a scheduling conflict between Jungkook's solo activity and another artist's group schedule, Jungkook's schedule took priority. If there was a limited pool of translators available for international press and both Jungkook and another artist had overseas promotions on the same week, Jungkook got the A-team translators. Every single time. No discussion. No negotiation. And the reason this sits at number 6 is because it reveals something deeper than just resource allocation. It reveals a mindset. Hybe didn't just treat Jungkook as a valuable artist. They treated him as an institution within the institution. His team wasn't a support staff, it was a micro-company operating inside the larger company, with its own hierarchy, its own protocols, and its own budget that reportedly had significantly more flexibility than what was allocated to other acts. One former finance department employee mentioned, and this is genuinely shocking, That Jungkook's individual management budget for personal schedules and solo activities in a given year was comparable to the entire group budget for some of the newer acts under Hybe labels. Comparable. Not a fraction of it. Not a percentage. Comparable. Let that sit with you for a moment. The amount of money Hybe was willing to spend on managing one person's individual career was roughly the same as what they'd invest in an entire group of 7 or more members. And yet, officially, Hybe has always maintained that all their artists receive fair and equitable support. The former staff members tell a very different story. They paint a picture of a company that made a calculated, deliberate decision to concentrate resources around its single most marketable individual, and while that might be smart business, it raises serious questions about what happens to the artists who don't receive that same level of investment. Do they underperform because they're less talented? Or do they underperform because they were never given the same tools to succeed? That's a question that doesn't have a comfortable answer. But hold on, because if you think a dedicated team of 18 people is extreme, wait until you hear what number 5 reveals. What if the special treatment wasn't just about staff and studios, but about something even more fundamental? What if Hybe actually changed the rules of how business decisions were made, specifically to benefit one artist? What if the company's own internal policies were rewritten, not for efficiency, not for fairness, but to make sure Jungkook always had the advantage? Number 5 is going to shake you. Number 5, the rewritten rulebook, when company policy bends for one man. This one right here is going to hit different because we're no longer talking about physical spaces or staff numbers. We're talking about the actual DNA of how Hybe operates as a corporation. The internal rules. The policies. The frameworks that are supposed to apply equally to every artist, every producer, every creative team under the Hybe umbrella. Because according to a former senior coordinator who worked in Hybe's artist management division from 2020 to 2023, the company didn't just give Jungkook more resources. They literally restructured certain operational policies to accommodate his preferences, his creative process, and his personal comfort. And when we say restructured, we don't mean they made small adjustments. We mean they created what this former staff member described as Jungkook protocols, unofficial, but widely understood internal guidelines that existed parallel to the company's official operating procedures. Let's start with the most obvious one, Creative Approval Authority. In any major entertainment company, there's a chain of command for how music gets approved. Typically, a track is composed, it goes through an A&R review, then it moves to the creative directors, and finally it reaches the executive producers or label heads who give the final green light. The artist's input matters, of course, but at the end of the day, the company retains final decision-making power over what gets released. That's standard across the industry. SM Entertainment operates that way. JYP operates that way. YG operates that way. Even Hybe, officially, operates that way on paper. But according to this former coordinator, Jungkook existed outside that chain entirely. When Jungkook was working on his solo material, particularly during the Golden album process, he reportedly had what amounted to absolute veto power over every single creative decision. Track selection, producer choice, concept direction, visual identity, music video treatment, styling for promotional appearances, all of it went through Jungkook first, and if he said no, it was no. End of conversation. No committee override. No executive intervention. No, let's circle back and reconsider. Just no. And the company accepted it. Every single time. Now you might say, well, that's just artistic freedom. A lot of senior artists have that. And you're right, to a degree. But here's what makes Jungkook's situation different. This level of creative autonomy wasn't something he had to negotiate for over years of proven solo success. It was reportedly given to him from the very beginning of his solo journey, before Seven had even been released, before anyone knew whether his solo career would commercially succeed at the level it eventually did. Hybe made a preemptive decision to hand over creative control to Jungkook based purely on their belief in his instincts, and more importantly, based on their fear of what might happen if he became dissatisfied with the process. Because let's be brutally honest about the context here. When BTS announced their shift toward individual activities in 2022, the entire K-pop industry held its breath. Hybe's stock price literally fluctuated based on speculation about the members' futures. And within that landscape, Jungkook was widely understood to be the single most commercially valuable individual, the one whose solo success or failure would most directly impact Hybe's bottom line, investor confidence, and market position. So when Hybe gave Jungkook total creative control, it wasn't purely an act of artistic respect. It was risk management. It was the company saying, "We cannot afford for this person to be unhappy. We cannot afford for him to feel restricted. We cannot afford for even the slightest rumor to surface that Jungkook is creatively frustrated at Hybe." The stakes were simply too high. But the policy restructuring went way beyond creative control. The former coordinator revealed that Hybe also changed its scheduling protocols specifically around Jungkook. In the standard system, all artists' schedules are managed through a centralized scheduling department that coordinates across groups and labels to avoid conflicts and maximize efficiency. But for Jungkook, a separate scheduling track was created. His schedules were locked in first, before anyone else's, and then the remaining artists' schedules were built around whatever gaps were left. This meant that if Jungkook wanted a particular date for a music show appearance, a variety show recording, or a brand event, that date was automatically blocked off for him before other artists even had the chance to request it. One former scheduling coordinator described a specific incident where a different Hybe group had been planning a comeback stage on a major music show for weeks, only to have their preferred date pulled at the last minute because Jungkook's team decided he would do a solo performance on that same program on that same day. The group's comeback stage was pushed back by a week, not because of a logistical impossibility, but because the unwritten rule was clear: Jungkook's schedule doesn't move. Everything else does. And apparently, this wasn't even a conversation that involved heated debates or pushback from the affected group's management team. It was simply accepted as the way things worked. The former staff member said, "Nobody argued. You just adjusted." Questioning it would be like questioning gravity. That analogy is telling because it reveals how deeply embedded this preferential treatment was in the company's culture. It wasn't perceived as unfair by most staff, it was perceived as natural. Inevitable. Just the way the universe of Hybe operated. Jungkook was the sun, and everything else orbited around him. Another policy shift involved international media coordination. Hybe has a dedicated global communications team that handles press inquiries, interview requests, and media appearances for all their artists. Standard procedure dictates that media opportunities are evaluated based on strategic value, reach, timing, alignment with current promotions, and then distributed among artists accordingly. But former staff revealed that when it came to high-profile international media, think Time magazine, Billboard cover stories, major American talk show appearances, BBC features, global fashion magazine editorials, Jungkook was always the first name considered. Always. If a request came in from a major global outlet and it could conceivably work for Jungkook, his team was consulted before anyone else's. Only if Jungkook's team declined, either because of scheduling conflicts or strategic reasons, would the opportunity be offered to other artists. This created a trickle-down effect where other Hybe soloists and groups were essentially receiving media opportunities that Jungkook had already passed on. They weren't getting the first pick. They were getting the leftovers. And while those leftovers were still significant platforms by any normal standard, the psychological impact of knowing you're always second in line, that every opportunity you receive was someone else's rejection, is something that shouldn't be underestimated. The former coordinator also mentioned something particularly revealing about how internal meetings were structured. At Hybe, regular strategy meetings are held to discuss each artist's promotional plans, upcoming releases, and long-term career trajectories. These meetings typically involve representatives from management, marketing, A&R, and the creative division. For most artists, these meetings follow a standardized format with set time slots, usually 30 to 45 minutes per artist or group. But meetings about Jungkook's solo strategy reportedly had no time limit. They could stretch for 2, sometimes 3 hours, with the full attention of senior executives including, on occasion, Chairman Bang Si-hyuk himself. The level of executive attention devoted to Jungkook's individual career was, according to this former staff member, unmatched by any other artist in the company, including other BTS members. And that last detail is perhaps the most uncomfortable part of this entire revelation. Because we're not just talking about Jungkook receiving more support than artists from other groups. We're talking about a system that, according to multiple former insiders, prioritized Jungkook even within BTS itself. The golden Maknae wasn't just golden to the fans, he was golden in the boardroom, golden in the scheduling system, golden in the policy framework, and golden in the eyes of the company's most powerful decision-makers. The reason this lands at number 5 is because it transitions from tangible resources, studios, staff, into something more systemic. This isn't about individual acts of favoritism. This is about a company that wove favoritism into its operational infrastructure. It wasn't a bug in the system. It was a feature. A deliberate, architected, institutionalized feature designed to ensure that one artist always had the smoothest path, the widest options, and the loudest voice in every room. But you know what? We're only at number 5, and things are about to get even more intense. Because what if this special treatment didn't just affect internal policies, but actually influenced how Hybe spent its money in the global market? What if the company's entire international business strategy was shaped, molded, and redirected based on one artist's solo potential? Number 4. The billion-dollar blueprint, an entire global strategy built around one face. Okay, now we're entering territory where the numbers get so big they almost stop feeling real. Because what we're about to discuss isn't just about favoritism inside a building in Seoul. This is about how one of the largest entertainment conglomerates in Asia allegedly designed its international financial strategy, its billion-dollar brand partnerships, and its global market expansion roadmap with one artist at the absolute center of everything. And that artist, as you've probably already guessed, is Jeon Jungkook. A former member of Hybe's global business development team, someone who was directly involved in negotiating international partnerships and brand endorsement deals between 2021 and 2023, revealed that internally, there was a concept that senior executives referred to as the JK premium. It wasn't an official term. You wouldn't find it in any corporate document or strategy deck that was shared externally. But within the walls of Hybe's business division, everyone knew exactly what it meant. The JK premium referred to the measurable increase in valuation, negotiating leverage, and deal size that Hybe could command whenever Jungkook was attached to a project, a campaign, or a partnership. And the numbers behind it were staggering. According to this former staff member, when Hybe approached global brands for endorsement deals involving BTS as a group, the standard rate was already astronomical. We're talking tens of millions of dollars per campaign. But when the pitch specifically guaranteed Jungkook as the primary face of the campaign, meaning he would be the one in the hero shot, the main commercial, the lead visual across all marketing materials, the asking price reportedly jumped by 30 to 50%. Not because Hybe was being greedy, because brands were willing to pay it. Every single time. The demand for Jungkook's individual brand power was so overwhelming that Hybe essentially had a 2-tier pricing structure for global partnerships, one rate for BTS as a group, and a significantly higher rate for any deal that featured Jungkook in a lead capacity. And the brands didn't push back. In fact, multiple luxury and lifestyle brands actively requested, sometimes demanded, that Jungkook be the focal point of any collaboration. The former business development team member described a negotiation with a major global fashion house, and while they didn't name the brand specifically, the timeline and description strongly suggest it was Calvin Klein, where the brand's representatives made it explicitly clear during initial discussions that their interest was primarily in Jungkook. Not BTS collectively. Not any other member. Jungkook. They had data. They had market research. They had consumer surveys from multiple countries showing that Jungkook's individual recognition, appeal, and purchase influence among the 18 to 34 demographic was significantly higher than the group's collective average. They came to the table knowing exactly what they wanted, and what they wanted was him. And Hybe leaned into that completely. Rather than pushing back and advocating for a more equitable distribution of brand opportunities across their roster, or even across BTS members, Hybe reportedly used Jungkook's outsized brand demand as their primary negotiating asset in virtually every major international deal. He became the opener, the closer, and the headliner of Hybe's global business pitch. One former marketing coordinator described the internal strategy presentations she sat in on, and she said something that really captures the dynamic perfectly. She said, "Every global pitch deck I saw had Jungkook on the first slide and the last slide. The first slide to grab attention. The last slide to close the deal. Everything in between was context. He was the product." And that phrase, "he was the product," is genuinely chilling when you think about it from the perspective of the other artists in the company. Because if Jungkook was the product that Hybe was selling to the global market, what did that make everyone else? Supporting material? Background context? Filler slides in a pitch deck designed to make Jungkook look even more exceptional by comparison? But the financial favoritism extended far beyond brand deals. The former business development team member also revealed that Hybe's international market expansion strategy, particularly its aggressive push into the North American and European markets between 2022 and 2024, was architected with Jungkook's solo debut as the central catalyst. When Hybe made decisions about which markets to prioritize, which radio networks to invest promotional budgets into, which streaming platforms to negotiate playlist placements with, and which media outlets to build relationships with, the primary consideration wasn't which Hybe artist would benefit most from this market investment. The primary consideration was, how will this infrastructure support Jungkook's solo launch? The former staff member described it as Hybe essentially building a highway, and while other artists would eventually be allowed to drive on that highway too, the road was designed, paved, and opened specifically for Jungkook to travel first. The investment in US radio promotion is a perfect example. Breaking into American radio as a K-pop artist is notoriously difficult and incredibly expensive. It requires dedicated radio promotion teams, strategic relationships with program directors at major stations, and substantial financial investment in what the industry calls radio servicing. The process of getting your song in front of the right people at the right stations at the right time. Hybe reportedly spent an unprecedented amount on radio promotion for 7 figures that former staff suggested were in the range of several $millions, far exceeding what any previous K-pop act had invested in a single radio campaign. And the strategy worked brilliantly. 7 didn't just chart, it dominated. It hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It received massive radio airplay across top 40 and pop formats in the United States, and it established Jungkook as a legitimate mainstream pop presence in the Western market. But here's the uncomfortable question. Would Hybe have made that same investment for any other artist on their roster? Would they have spent millions on radio promotion for a solo debut by any other idol, even one from BTS? The former staff members unanimously said no. Not even close. The budget that was allocated to Jungkook's solo launch was described as being in a category of its own, a financial commitment that reflected Hybe's belief that Jungkook wasn't just another solo artist. He was their bid for permanent global relevance. He was the vehicle through which Hybe intended to transcend the K-pop label entirely and position itself as a player in the mainstream global pop industry. Every dollar spent on his promotion was an investment not just in his career, but in Hybe's identity as a company. And the return on investment proved them right, at least commercially. 7 shattered records. Golden moved massive units. Jungkook's solo brand deals generated revenue that justified every cent of the promotional spend. But the success of the strategy doesn't erase the fundamental inequity of the system that produced it. Because while Hybe was pouring millions into making Jungkook a global mainstream superstar, other artists under the same corporate umbrella were launching solo projects with a fraction of the budget, a fraction of the promotional infrastructure, and a fraction of the executive attention. Their comebacks were supported, yes, but supported is very different from championed. There's a world of difference between a company that allocates a reasonable budget for your album rollout and a company that treats your debut like a military campaign, deploying resources with the intensity and precision of a multinational product launch. Jungkook got the military campaign. Everyone else got the reasonable budget. And the financial data reflects this disparity clearly. While Hybe has never publicly broken down per artist promotional spending, former staff members indicated that the gap between Jungkook's solo promotional budget and the next highest solo budget within the company was not a matter of 10 or 20%. It was multiples. As in, Jungkook's budget was several times larger than what was allocated to any other individual artist's solo activities. That's not favoritism. That's a fundamentally different tier of investment. A different league entirely. The reason this revelation sits at number 4 is because it moves the conversation beyond internal company dynamics and into the realm of global market economics. This isn't just about how one company treated one artist inside its own building. This is about how one company's financial decisions that affected market competition, industry standards, and the career trajectories of dozens of other artists, were shaped by their commitment to elevating one individual above all others. The JK Premium wasn't just a catchy internal nickname. It was a business philosophy, a financial doctrine, and it fundamentally altered the landscape of K-pop's relationship with the global entertainment market. But listen, we're not done yet. Not even close. Because if you think the financial revelations were intense, number 3 is going to take this entire conversation to a level you did not see coming. Number 3. The invisible shield, protecting his heart before his career. This is the one that changes the entire tone of everything we've been talking about. Because up until now, we've been discussing studios, staff, policies, money, all tangible, measurable, corporate things. But number 3 is where the story stops being about business and starts being about something that's almost impossible to quantify. Emotion. Comfort. Peace of mind. The inner world of a young man who became one of the most famous human beings on the planet before he turned 25. According to 3 separate former Hybe employees, a personal manager, a communications team member, and a former in-house counselor, Hybe didn't just invest in Jungkook's career. They invested in his emotional ecosystem. And the systems they built to protect his mental and emotional well-being were so elaborate, so carefully maintained, and so deeply embedded into the company's daily operations that most people who worked at Hybe didn't even realize they existed. It was invisible by design. Let's start with the most striking revelation, the mood monitoring system. The former personal manager described a practice where Jungkook's immediate team was trained to observe and report on his emotional state on a daily basis. This wasn't a formal psychological evaluation. It was more subtle than that. Every morning, when Jungkook arrived at the Hybe building or connected with his team for the day's schedule, his managers would assess his general mood, his energy level, his body language, how he spoke, whether he seemed enthusiastic or withdrawn. And this assessment would be quietly communicated up the chain to the scheduling coordinators and the creative team leads. The reason? Because if Jungkook was having a low day, if he seemed tired, stressed, emotionally drained, or just not in the right headspace, the day's schedule would be adjusted in real time. Not canceled outright, but softened. A demanding vocal recording session might be swapped for a lighter activity like a styling fitting or a casual content shoot. A high-pressure interview might be postponed by a few hours to give him time to decompress. A fan interaction event might be restructured so that the most emotionally taxing portions, like reading deeply personal fan letters on camera, were moved to later in the day when his team felt he was in a stronger place to handle them. Think about what that means. There was an entire invisible infrastructure operating every single day whose sole purpose was to read Jungkook's emotional temperature and then reshape the professional world around him to match whatever he was feeling. If he woke up happy and energized, the team would lean into the full schedule. If he woke up heavy, the entire machinery would quietly recalibrate to create a softer, less demanding environment. And other artists? They showed up and did whatever was on the schedule. Period. There was no mood assessment. There was no real-time adjustment. If you were tired, you pushed through. If you were stressed, you performed anyway. If you were having a genuinely terrible day and the schedule said you had a 3-hour dance rehearsal followed by a variety show recording followed by a late-night V-Live, that's exactly what you did. Because the schedule was the schedule and it didn't bend for your feelings. But for Jungkook, the schedule was alive. It breathed. It responded. It moved with him like a living thing, constantly adapting to protect his inner world from the kind of pressure that has destroyed countless other idols. And honestly, there's a part of me that finds this genuinely beautiful. Because the K-pop industry is notorious, absolutely infamous, for burning out its artists. We've seen it happen over and over again. Idols collapsing on stage from exhaustion. Artists publicly breaking down during concerts because the pressure became unbearable. Mental health crises that ended careers, or worse. The industry has a body count, and everyone knows it. So the fact that Hybe built a system specifically designed to protect one artist from that kind of destruction, there's something undeniably compassionate about that. But the compassion becomes complicated when you realize it was extended to one person and not to others. The former in-house counselor provided perhaps the most revealing account of all. Hybe, to its credit, does provide mental health resources for its artists, access to professional counselors, psychological support programs, and wellness initiatives. But according to this former counselor, the quality and accessibility of those resources vary dramatically depending on who you were. For most artists, mental health support was available on a request basis, meaning you had to actively reach out, schedule an appointment, and then hope that the timing worked with your already packed schedule. It was there if you sought it out, but nobody was going to come to you. For Jungkook, the system worked in reverse. Mental health check-ins were built into his schedule proactively. A wellness coordinator would periodically check in with him, not in a clinical, sit-down-on-a-couch way, but in a casual, conversational way that felt natural and non-intrusive. The former counselor described it as embedded wellness, mental health support that was woven so seamlessly into his daily routine that it didn't feel like therapy or monitoring. It felt like genuine care. Like having someone around who just happened to always ask the right questions at the right time. And Jungkook reportedly responded well to this approach. He's spoken publicly about his own emotional struggles, about the weight of fame, about the loneliness that comes with being recognized everywhere you go. So having a support system that met him where he was rather than waiting for him to ask for help likely made a genuine difference in his ability to sustain his career at the level he has. But here's what makes this revelation sit at number 3. It's not just about the mood monitoring or the wellness check-ins. It's about the lengths Hybe went to in order to control Jungkook's information environment. The former communications team member revealed something that sounds almost dystopian in its thoroughness. Hybe's communications team reportedly maintained what was internally referred to as a negative filtration protocol specifically for Jungkook. This meant that the team actively monitored online discourse, social media, forums, news articles, comment sections, and curated what information reached Jungkook's immediate environment. If there was a wave of negative press, a malicious rumor, a trending hate campaign, or even an unusually harsh round of criticism following a performance or release, the communications team would work to ensure that Jungkook wasn't directly exposed to it. This didn't mean they hid things from him entirely. He's a grown adult with his own phone and his own social media access, and he could obviously see whatever he wanted to see. But the people around him, his managers, his stylists, his daily team, were briefed on what was happening online and instructed not to bring it up, not to discuss it in his presence, and not to react to it in ways that might draw his attention. The idea was to create a bubble of normalcy around him so that, even when the internet was on fire with negativity about something related to him, his immediate physical world remained calm, supportive, and focused on the work. One former manager described a specific incident during the period when Jungkook's dating rumors were generating massive online controversy. He said the internal directive was crystal clear. Nobody on Jungkook's personal team was to mention anything about the online discourse. Phones were to be kept on silent during team interactions. News apps were not to be scrolled through in shared spaces. And if Jungkook himself brought it up, The team was instructed to acknowledge his feelings without amplifying the narrative, to be supportive without adding fuel to whatever emotional fire he might have been experiencing. Compare that to what other idols go through when scandals hit. Most of them are left to navigate the storm largely on their own, with maybe a brief company statement and a manager telling them to stay off social media for a few days. There's no curated information environment. There's no team of people quietly reshaping reality around them to minimize emotional damage. There's just the idol, their phone, and millions of strangers saying terrible things about them with no filter whatsoever. The emotional toll of that disparity is impossible to overstate. One former staff member who worked with a different Hybe group said something haunting. She said, "I watched our artist cry in a bathroom after reading comments, and all I could do was hand them tissues and tell them it would pass." Meanwhile, Jungkook had an entire system making sure those comments never even reached his ears. Same company, same building, different universes. That quote alone tells you everything you need to know about number 3. This wasn't just special treatment. This was a parallel reality. A carefully constructed emotional sanctuary that existed exclusively for one person, maintained by a network of people whose daily mission was to ensure that the most famous member of the most famous group in K-pop history could wake up every morning and feel, even for a moment, like the world wasn't crushing him. It's protective. It's extraordinary. And, depending on how you look at it, it's either the most caring thing a company has ever done for an artist or the most unfair. But we're not done. Number 2, the narrative machine, engineering a god in the public eye. This is the one that's going to make you question everything you've ever consumed about K-pop. Everything. Every headline. Every trending topic. Every viral moment. Every organic, fan-driven narrative that seemed to just happen naturally. Because according to a former member of Hybe's Strategic Communications Division, someone who sat in the war rooms where public perception was designed, tested, and deployed, Jungkook's image as the undisputed golden standard of K-pop wasn't just earned through talent and hard work. It was engineered. Systematically. Relentlessly. And with a level of sophistication that would make a political campaign strategist jealous. Let's start with the concept that this former staff member referred to as narrative seeding. In the world of corporate communications, narrative seeding is the practice of strategically placing ideas, stories, and talking points into the media ecosystem so that they grow organically, or at least appear to grow organically, into widely accepted truths. Every major company does some version of this. But according to this insider, Hybe elevated narrative seeding to an art form when it came to Jungkook, and they did it across 3 distinct layers: traditional media, social media, and fan community dynamics. On the traditional media front, the former staff member described a practice where Hybe's PR team would prepare what they called JK highlight packets before any major group appearance, interview, or event. These packets were essentially curated sets of talking points, suggested questions, and angle recommendations that were shared with media outlets and interviewers in advance. Now, providing media briefings before interviews isn't unusual. Most entertainment PR teams do this to some extent. But the specific nature of these packets was revealing. They were designed to subtly steer conversations toward Jungkook. Suggested interview questions would include prompts that naturally led to Jungkook getting extended airtime, questions about vocal techniques that would highlight his abilities, questions about group dynamics that would position him as the emotional anchor, questions about future plans that would allow him to tease solo ambitions. The former staff member said these packets weren't aggressive or obvious. They didn't say, "Focus on Jungkook." They were crafted with the kind of subtlety that made interviewers feel like they were making their own editorial choices when, in reality, they were following a map that Hybe had drawn for them. And it worked beautifully. If you go back and watch major BTS interviews from the 2020 to 2023 era, whether it's American talk shows, Billboard cover story videos, or international press junkets, and you pay close attention to how questions are structured, you'll notice a pattern. Jungkook consistently gets questions that allow him to shine in ways that feel natural but are actually choreographed. He gets the vocal demonstration requests. He gets the "what's next for you personally" questions. He gets the moments that produce the clips that go viral. And those viral clips? That brings us to the second layer, social media narrative engineering. The former communications team member revealed that Hybe maintained a dedicated social media analytics unit that tracked real-time engagement metrics across all platforms, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Weverse, for every artist. But the data wasn't just passively collected. It was actively used to inform content strategy, and that strategy disproportionately favored Jungkook. Here's how it worked. The analytics team would identify which types of Jungkook content generated the highest engagement, certain expressions, certain activities, certain candid moments, certain styling choices. And then that data would be fed back to the content production team. The next time Jungkook was scheduled for behind-the-scenes filming, a content shoot, or even a casual social media post, the content team would subtly guide the situation to reproduce the elements that data showed would perform best. If analytics revealed that videos of Jungkook laughing and being playful generated 40% more engagement than serious or artistic content, the content team would create environments that encouraged that playful energy. If data showed that Jungkook in a particular style of clothing, say, oversized hoodies or sleeveless workout gear, generated spikes in social media activity, you'd mysteriously see more content featuring those looks in the coming weeks. It wasn't manipulation in the crude sense. Nobody was forcing Jungkook to act a certain way or wear certain things against his will. But the environment around him was constantly being optimized, fine-tuned, and calibrated based on engagement data to ensure that every piece of content featuring him had the highest possible chance of going viral. Every candid moment was a little less candid than it appeared. Every spontaneous interaction was happening in a context that had been quietly shaped by data scientists sitting in a room full of screens tracking real-time engagement curves. And here's the part that really separates this from standard marketing. The same level of data-driven content optimization was not applied to other artists with nearly the same intensity. The former staff member was blunt about this. She said, "We tracked everyone's numbers." But when Jungkook's content underperformed, and I mean by his standards, which were already astronomical, there would be a meeting about it within hours. When another artist's content underperformed, it was noted in a weekly report that maybe got discussed for 5 minutes. The urgency was completely different. The third layer, fan community dynamics, is where things get genuinely unsettling. The former communications team member described a practice where Hybe monitored major fan communities, fan accounts, and fan-driven narratives across platforms, and strategically amplified the ones that supported the image they wanted Jungkook to have. This didn't mean Hybe was running fake fan accounts or planting stories. The former staff member was very clear about that. But they were selectively engaging with and signal-boosting fan narratives that aligned with their desired positioning. If fan communities were organically generating content about Jungkook's incredible work ethic, his vocal improvement, his dance precision, his humble personality, narratives that reinforced the golden Maknae image, Hybe would find subtle ways to validate and amplify those narratives. Maybe an official behind-the-scenes video would be released that just happened to show Jungkook practicing alone late at night, reinforcing the hardest worker in the room narrative. Maybe an official photo set would include a candid shot that just happened to capture him helping a staff member carry equipment, reinforcing the humble despite fame narrative. Every piece of official content was a chess move in a larger narrative game, and the board was always tilted in Jungkook's favor. But what about narratives that Hybe didn't want? The former staff member revealed that when fan communities or media outlets began generating narratives that didn't serve Jungkook's image, comparisons that placed other artists above him in certain categories, criticism of his vocal technique, or discourse that questioned whether his popularity was organic, the communications team would deploy what they called redirect strategies. These weren't aggressive takedowns or censorship campaigns. They were more elegant than that. A redirect strategy might involve releasing a piece of high-performing Jungkook content at a strategically timed moment to shift the online conversation. If negative discourse about Jungkook was gaining traction on a Monday morning, don't be surprised if by Monday afternoon, Hybe's official channels released an incredibly engaging Jungkook clip that immediately dominated the trending conversation and drowned out the criticism with an overwhelming wave of positive engagement. The timing was never coincidental. It was calculated, rehearsed, and executed with the precision of a military countermeasure. And this is where the former staff member made an observation that honestly sent chills down my spine. She said, "The Jungkook you see, the one the world loves, he's real. His talent is real. His personality is real. His charm is real. But the lens through which the world sees him? That lens was ground, polished, and positioned by us. We didn't create a fiction. We created a frame. And everything inside that frame was arranged to make sure he always looked like the most important person in the picture. Not because he wasn't important, he was. But because the company needed the world to believe that he wasn't just important. He was essential, irreplaceable, singular. And we made damn sure that's exactly how every headline, every clip, every trending topic made him feel." That quote right there is why this revelation sits at number 2. Because it's one thing to give an artist a better studio or a bigger team. Those are resources. They can be measured, compared, and debated. But engineering public perception, shaping the very way millions of people understand and relate to a human being, that's power on a completely different level. That's not favoritism. That's myth-making. And Hybe, according to these former staff members, were master myth-makers. They took a genuinely extraordinary young man from Busan and made sure the world never had the chance to see him as anything less than legendary. The frame was always perfect. The lighting was always right. And anyone who might have cast a shadow? Number 1, the sacrificed ones, careers that burned so his star could rise. This is it. The final revelation. The one that every single former Hybe staff member, regardless of which department they worked in, regardless of how long they were with the company, regardless of whether they left on good terms or bad, pointed to as the single most uncomfortable truth about Jungkook's special treatment. And it's not about what Jungkook received. It's about what others lost. Because in any system where resources are finite, where there are only so many promotional slots, only so many brand deals, only so many primetime media appearances, only so many hours of executive attention, giving disproportionately to one person means taking from everyone else. And according to multiple former insiders, the cost of building Jungkook's throne was paid, quietly and painfully, by artists who never even knew the full extent of what was being redirected away from them. A former A&R coordinator, someone who was responsible for managing the pipeline of music production across multiple Hybe labels acts, revealed something that cuts to the absolute core of this entire discussion. He said that during the critical period of 2022 to 2023, when BTS transitioned to individual activities and Hybe was simultaneously managing comebacks for 17, Hybe, TXT, LE Seraphim, New Jeans, and the early stages of several new debut projects, the company faced a genuine resource crunch. There simply weren't enough top-tier producers, enough premium studio time, enough marketing bandwidth, and enough executive oversight to give every act the support they needed at the level they deserved. And when tough allocation decisions had to be made, when someone in a boardroom had to look at a spreadsheet and decide where the best producers go, where the biggest budgets go, where the most experienced promotional teams go, Jungkook's solo project was always the first line item locked in. Everything else was negotiable. He was not. The former A&R coordinator described a specific situation that haunts him to this day. He said there was a period when a highly sought-after international producer, someone with multiple Grammy credits and a reputation for creating career-defining tracks, was available for a limited window to collaborate with Hybe artists. Multiple acts were interested. Multiple teams submitted proposals. The producer's availability could have potentially accommodated 2 projects if the scheduling was handled carefully. But instead of splitting the opportunity, Hybe's senior leadership made the decision to dedicate the producer's entire availability exclusively to Jungkook's album. The rationale was straightforward from a business perspective. Jungkook's solo project had the highest commercial ceiling, so the highest caliber collaborator should be matched with the highest potential project. It makes cold, rational sense. But the former coordinator said he watched the faces of the other teams when the decision was communicated. He said there was no shouting, no dramatic protest, just this quiet deflation. This silent acceptance that no matter how hard they fought for their artist, no matter how strong their pitch was, the answer was always going to be the same. Jungkook first. Everyone else after. And that quiet deflation, that accumulated, compounding sense of being perpetually second priority, had real consequences for real careers. The former coordinator spoke about an artist. He wouldn't name them, but the context suggests it was a solo act under one of Hybe's subsidiary labels, who had been preparing for a comeback that was supposed to be their breakout moment. The concept was strong. The music was ready. The team had been working for months to build momentum. But in the final weeks before launch, key promotional resources were quietly reassigned to support Jungkook's upcoming release, which had been moved up on the schedule. The marketing team that had been building the other artists' campaign was partially redirected. The media booking team prioritized securing press coverage for Jungkook. Even the social media content calendar was adjusted to reduce the frequency of posts about the other artists' comeback so that the algorithm-driven attention wouldn't be diluted when Jungkook's promotional cycle began. The other artists' comeback still happened. It was still supported. But it launched into a headwind of reduced internal support and an external media landscape that was already being primed for Jungkook's release. The numbers reflected the difference. The comeback underperformed relative to projections, not catastrophically, but enough to affect the trajectory of that artist's career. Enough to change how the company assessed their commercial viability going forward. Enough to influence future budget allocations, which would be based on this underperformance, creating a vicious cycle where the initial resource deprivation led to weaker results, which then justified even fewer resources in the future. One career trajectory subtly altered. One set of dreams quietly dimmed. Not because the artist wasn't talented. Not because the music wasn't good. But because the company's attention and resources were pointed in a different direction at the exact moment when they were needed most. And this wasn't an isolated incident. The former staff members described it as a systemic pattern, a gravitational pull that bent every decision, every allocation, every strategic conversation toward Jungkook's orbit. When resources were abundant, everyone got what they needed and the favoritism was less visible. But the moment resources became scarce, and in the entertainment industry, resources are always eventually scarce, the hierarchy revealed itself with brutal clarity. Jungkook was the protected class. Everyone else was expendable margin. A former HR coordinator added another dimension to this story that's particularly painful. She said that the staffing disparities we discussed in number 6, Jungkook's team of 15 to 18 versus other artists' teams of 5 to 7, had a direct human cost. Several experienced managers and coordinators who were working with other Hybe acts were quietly transferred to Jungkook's support team during the build-up to his solo debut because the company needed its most skilled people on its most important project. These transfers weren't presented as demotions. They were framed as strategic reassignments and career growth opportunities. But the effect on the artists who lost their most trusted team members was devastating. Imagine you're an idol who has built a deep, trusting relationship with your manager over 2 or 3 years. This person knows your habits, your anxieties, your creative preferences, your dietary restrictions, the way you need to be talked to before a performance versus after a bad day. And then one morning, you're told that person has been reassigned. Your new manager is competent, sure, but they're a stranger. They don't know you. They don't know your rhythms. And you can feel, even if nobody says it directly, that you lost your person because someone more important needed them more. The former HR coordinator said she processed multiple internal requests from artists' personal teams asking for clarification about why staff members were being moved. The answers were always vague: organizational restructuring, team optimization, strategic alignment. But everyone knew the real reason. The Jungkook project was ramping up, and it needed bodies. Skilled, experienced, reliable bodies. And the easiest place to find them was by pulling them from teams that the company considered less critical. The human toll extended to the staff themselves. Several former employees described experiencing what one of them called hierarchy fatigue, a persistent, low-grade demoralization that came from working in an environment where your professional value was determined not by your skills or dedication, but by which artist you were assigned to. Staff members on Jungkook's team received better internal evaluations, faster promotions, and more performance bonuses, not necessarily because they worked harder, but because their work was more visible to senior leadership. When your daily reports are being read by executives, including the chairman himself, your contributions are naturally going to be noticed and rewarded more than someone doing equally demanding work for an artist whose strategy meeting gets 15 minutes of attention once a month. This created an internal culture where being assigned to Jungkook's team was seen as the ultimate career achievement for Hybe employees, and being assigned to anyone else felt, by comparison, like being sent to the minor leagues. The former staff members were careful to emphasize something important. None of this was Jungkook's fault. Not one of them blamed him personally. In fact, multiple former employees spoke about Jungkook with genuine warmth and admiration. They described him as polite, humble, hardworking, and often visibly uncomfortable with the amount of attention and resources being directed toward him. One former manager said Jungkook once asked, during a quiet moment, whether the other members and artists were getting the same support that he was. He was told yes. It was a lie. A well-intentioned lie, perhaps, told to spare him guilt for a system he didn't design and didn't ask for. But a lie nonetheless. And that might be the most poignant detail in this entire list. The man at the center of the most elaborate preferential treatment system in K-pop history didn't even know the full extent of it. So let's step back and look at what we've just uncovered, 7 revelations from Hybe's own former staff that paint a picture so complete, so detailed, and so uncomfortably honest that it's impossible to look at the K-pop industry the same way after hearing it. At number 7, we learned that Jungkook had a private, custom-built recording studio that sat permanently reserved under his name, a physical space that no other artist could touch, even when it sat empty for weeks. It was more than a room. It was a statement carved into the architecture of the building itself. At number 6, we discovered the Shadow Army, a personal team of 15 to 18 people whose entire professional lives revolved around one individual, dwarfing the skeleton crews assigned to other artists who were fighting to manage 3 members with half the staff. At number 5, we saw how Hybe rewrote its own internal rulebook, granting Jungkook absolute creative veto power, restructuring scheduling protocols so his calendar was always locked in first, and devoting unlimited executive meeting time to his solo strategy, while other artists got 15-minute slots. At number 4, the money started talking, and it screamed. The JK Premium, that inflated brand deal valuations by 30 to 50%. The multi-million-dollar radio campaign for 7. A solo promotional budget that was several times larger than any other individual artist's allocation. An entire global market expansion strategy designed with Jungkook as the centerpiece. At number 3, things got deeply personal. The invisible shield, mood monitoring systems that reshaped his daily schedule in real time based on his emotional state, embedded wellness support that other artists had to seek out on their own, and a negative filtration protocol that curated his information environment to protect him from the internet's cruelty. At number 2, the narrative machine was exposed. JK highlight packets steering media coverage. Data-driven content optimization, ensuring every piece of Jungkook content was engineered for maximum virality. Redirect strategies deployed to drown out negative discourse with strategically timed positive content. The public image of the golden Maknae wasn't fiction, but the frame through which the world saw it was meticulously designed. And at number 1, we confronted the hardest truth of all, the sacrificed ones. Careers deprioritized. Resources redirected. Staff reassigned. Dreams quietly downsized. The human cost of building one person's throne, paid by people who never chose to make that sacrifice and never even knew the full extent of what was being taken from them. So what's the takeaway? Is Jungkook's talent real? Absolutely. Without question. The man's voice, his artistry, his stage presence, his ability to connect with hundreds of millions of people across every continent, none of that was manufactured. You can't fake the kind of electricity that Jeon Jungkook brings to a performance. But talent alone doesn't explain the scale of his dominance. Talent is the spark. What Hybe built around that spark, the studios, the staff, the policies, the budgets, the emotional infrastructure, the narrative machinery, the resource prioritization, that was the oxygen. And when you give one flame unlimited oxygen while quietly reducing the air supply to every other fire in the room, it shouldn't surprise anyone that one blaze burns brighter than all the rest. This isn't a story about a villain. Jungkook isn't a villain. Hybe isn't even entirely a villain. They're a company making calculated decisions in an industry that rewards ruthless optimization. But it is a story about a system. A system that decides, behind closed doors, who gets to shine and who gets to stand in the shadows. A system that smiles for the cameras while quietly rearranging the world to ensure that the outcome was never really in doubt. The next time you see Jungkook on stage, bathed in light, commanding the attention of the entire world, appreciate the talent. It's real. It's extraordinary. It's once in a generation. But also remember the rooms you can't see, the meetings you weren't in, the budgets you'll never read, the careers that were bent so his could soar. Because the golden throne isn't just made of gold. It's made of choices. And in the K-pop industry, not everyone gets to make their own. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this opened your eyes, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, in this industry, the truth is always more complicated than the highlight reel. Stay curious. Stay critical. And we'll see you in the next one. Peace. That's your complete series, intro through number 1 plus the closing added value summary. The channel is officially closed.